Hello, my name is Dawn H. Jones and I'm the Managing Director of Hope Place HR. And we help organisations deal with challenging and often frustrating problems so they can focus on their priorities and build successful, thriving teams. But before we get into today's video, can I ask you a favour? If you haven't subscribed to this channel already, would you please do so, and we thank you in advance for your subscription. So this week's topic is called Help Arises from Surprising Places. And recently I've been reflecting on people who are intentionally mistreating and targeting people in their workplace. Now these individuals tend to plot, strategize and execute their plans through discriminatory actions or less favourable treatments, or it may be that they utilise any behaviour that causes dis-ease to their colleagues. And the impact of these adverse behaviours can range from mild irritation to significant stress and distress. And some employees have been traumatised. Now personally, I found it challenging to listen and witness some of the injustices people have shared with me. I've often found it more difficult to witness the effects on people's mental health and well-being, mainly because these behaviours that I'm talking about are entirely avoidable. They are a choice. Now, interestingly, individuals who choose to behave toxically in this way believe their power, position and authority will insulate them against the repercussions or any call to account for their behaviour. Plus, they often utilise the organisation's resources to boost or protect their position. Worse still, this power can be pretty seductive and lead to a feeling of invincibility, arrogance and cliques. I can't be touched. And perpetrators gamble that their targets will not hold them to account, perhaps because they're more senior to their target, or their target may be concerned about how their career will be affected. And that's just to name a few reasons. So you can probably imagine how daunting it can be for most employees to summon the courage to speak up, let alone have the courage to do so. Now, it's not all doom and gloom, I promise, so just hang in there with me. In my experience, when a perpetrator of poor behaviours targets an individual, they typically focus solely on the individual. However, they don't account for the potential connections or resources of the person they are targeting. All right? So let me illustrate what I mean for you by this point for you. When I think about the contacts on my phone, I generally identify them solely by their name. But one day I got to thinking about my contacts' professional status and expertise, the value of my network. So in my contacts, I have a former CEO, lawyers, business owners, counsellors, lecturers, teachers, hairdressers, nurses, medical consultants, senior managers, HR and financial professionals, as well as support staff, and so on. Now, say a perpetrator was to target me, all right? The chances are they wouldn't consider the sources of help to which I may have access, or in other words, what relief could possibly arise for me. Now, my network has stepped up for me time and time again to help me in a time of need. They've helped me personally and they've helped me professionally, or they've been able to introduce me to someone in their network. And equally, I've also leveraged my network to help people, some of whom I've only heard about through a third party. Now, that is why I say help can arise from surprising places, because you don't know who's connected to who. Let me give you a few examples. So someone called Sue, not her real name, noticed that a newly appointed team member was making mistakes. Now, these mistakes could have been averted by a comprehensive induction. Instead, the line manager and other team members were blaming the newly appointed team members for their errors. Sue saw that her colleague was struggling really badly, so she contacted a coach in her network and to help her colleague and said, look, I can't get involved, but would you please help her because she is struggling? So the coach helped the newly appointed team member manage her performance, and she also gave her strategies for working in a complex environment. Help arose for the newly appointed team member who was struggling. Okay. Second example. So a well-respected and no-nonsense mentor, we'll call her Jane, told me the story of one of her mentees. She's told me that one of her mentees, line manager, was treating her really badly. During a conversation, Jane's mentee mentioned to her line manager that Jane was her mentor. And the manager replied, "Oh, I know Jane." And from that moment on, her manager started to treat her very well. And Jane's connection to her mentee transformed the relationship she was receiving from her manager. See, help can arise in surprising places. And last but not least, I remember a senior manager recounting that colleagues were trying to oust her from her position. And, she was stressed and she was particularly aggrieved at her treatment. And I listened to her for a while before saying to her, "You're using way too much emotional energy and you need to focus on the issues." Then she asked me to review an email she had written to her managers, and the email was documenting her concerns. So I read her email and I redrafted a concise, factual response describing the issues of concern and her desired resolution. She agreed with the draft and she sent it off to her senior colleague. From that moment on, senior colleagues began to treat her fairly and surpass the resolutions that she was actually seeking from them. Remember, help can arise in surprising places. Her colleagues didn't expect any pushback from her or any calling of account for their behaviour, but she stood up. I could also tell you other stories of people receiving help from YouTube videos like those on my channel. And I also recalled the person who asked for HR expertise on social media for a family member. So they just sent out help and SOS. And that very action helped to avert serious career consequences for their family member. Or I could tell you about people who obtain help through third-party connections. Someone hears about somebody, and someone connects somebody to that person. I've seen help arise for people time and time again. So if you are a manager or an employee who is targeting or tempted to target a colleague, this is really useful for you to understand. You may see a target, however, you can never be sure who will arise and support the individual who you are targeting. They may be scared out of their wits. However, if that individual can get access to the right help, they can begin to level the power differential and find the courage to stand and prevail against adversity. For example, I recall leveraging the expertise of 3 people in my network to help someone who desperately needed help and support. They didn't know these people, but I did. Now, because my goal is to help everyone thrive in the workplace, I want to say that there are potential costs to perpetrators and their employers for their poor conduct. So it pays to count potential costs. And what are these costs? These costs include being subject to grievance proceedings, okay, or disciplinary proceedings, or indeed employment tribunal proceedings. And that may include being personally named in employment tribunals. And other outcomes could include reputational damage and an impact on your loved ones. So please stop what you're doing and make amends. Now, if you are suffering from adverse behaviours, help may be closer than what you think. Sources of help include employee assistance schemes. So many employees have an employee assistance scheme with free benefit, and these schemes typically offer several hours of free counselling. So, speak to your HR department to see if your employer has one. Other sources of support include trade unions and professional associations. If you're a member, check out their website. In my experience, they have more help than people think because people generally don't explore what's available to them. Now, if your health is affected, please make an appointment to see your GP. Prioritise your health and well-being. Or, like me, help may be at hand on your phone. Now, equally, if you are a perpetrator and you genuinely want to change your behaviour, you may wish to utilise these sources of help also. So, in essence, let's treat each other well because it's the right thing to do. And when we do, we create thriving workplaces. And when we don't, we should not be surprised that help can arise from surprising places. So choose well. Thank you for listening, and until next week, remember to be HR wise. Bye-bye.